Hey, what's up YouTube? Welcome to another video by Ratchets and Wrenches, and today I'm gonna show you how to find a suspension noise that we're having on this 1998 Audi with the 2.8 liter engine. As you can see, I already got the car supported on jack stands. Well, just this side is supported on jack stands, so don't forget to also put on your parking brakes. But the way I was able to narrow it down to this side was basically just drove this car over little dips in the road and noticed that I hear it clunking, or no, I don't hear it as much as I feel it actually. It's like a popping or clunking kind of noise. So, and it was only when this side went over little dips in the road. So I had to jack this side up and start checking for, trying to see if I can find where the noise is actually coming from. Okay? Okay, as some of you may know, one of the ways of checking for any suspension issues is to basically, after you jack up the car, basically grab the wheel from the 3 and 9 o'clock positions and basically rock it back and forth. Now you're going to be able to move this a little bit. Anyway, what you want to, the kind of movement you want to look for is that, like a sudden popping movement, like, you can feel it. You start pressing on it and it kind of pops. That's kind of when if you get that pop, you probably have a problem with your outer tie rod or possibly your inner tie rod as well. Sometimes you could have a problem with your sway bar end links if so equipped. So, you want to keep that in mind. But on this car, I don't feel any kind of popping movement at all. So what we're going to do next is actually grab it from the 6 and 12 o'clock positions and try to rock it back and forth this way. Nope, nothing there either. But if we did have a popping movement, then you could probably have a problem with your either lower ball joint or upper ball joint if the car is equipped with one. Okay, but we don't have any of those issues. We can't feel any popping. So what we're going to do next is actually take this wheel off and have a closer look. Okay, but before we do that, sometimes some lower ball joints you're going to have to raise the control arm. Get a jack underneath there and raise the control arm to test it, but so if they need to be lifted to be able to properly test it, but most of the times you don't have to do that. And for now I'm gonna stay away from doing that. I'm gonna pop this wheel off first and try to look at the components closer to try to see if I can figure it out, but that's something you want to keep in mind. Okay, as you can see, it's the next day and I didn't have enough time to finish this last night, so we're gonna inspect this today. So as you can, and obviously as you remember, we took the wheel off and now it's time to inspect our suspension components. This thing's got a sway bar and two control arms, two separate control arms. This is the front one and this is the rear control arm. They're not connected to each other, they're separate, and they're connected down here with two ball joints down here, and also it has two upper control arms, and as you can see, here they are. Here's our outer tie rod, and pretty sure this is fine because when we were testing the wheel, when we were turning it when we were grabbing it from the 3 and 9 o'clock positions and trying to push it back and forth. If this was bad, you would feel some movement, but pretty sure we can rule that out. But now it's time to go around and inspect all the bushings for our control arms, and we're going to start from these top ones. Okay, so the way you want to inspect these control arm bushings as well, you can always inspect them visually, and they look good. I mean, the control arm is not hitting the metal housing that's around it, so it's always a good sign. But you can also always just get us a pry bar and try moving it back and forth, and if there is excessive movement, then that way that these control arms, maybe the bushings are worn or maybe torn, so you might have to replace them. You can see there's very little movement here. I mean, this is pretty firm. I got a really long pry bar here, so I'm putting a lot of force on it and it's barely moving, so that one is pretty good. Okay, next it's time to this one. We do the same test for this. Just get the pry bar in there and check for movement. There's some movement, but I mean, these control arms are worn, so there's going to be some movement, but as long as it's not excessive, that's fine. Okay, and here's the bushing for our front control arm. So we're going to basically try to move it around, see how much movement there is. Stick this pry bar in here, and some movement, but that's just normal movement, you know. If there was excessive, you would know it. Okay, and as I said earlier, this thing has a sway bar and sway bar bushings, and we want to inspect those next. It's gonna be hard to show you guys, but because since there's a splash shield here that's covering it, but there's our sway bar bushing right there. This guy right there, you can always try touching it. Like if it feels really dry to the touch, then that's a bad sign usually. That means it's drying out and it's probably you know, not working well. But this thing is pretty pliable, this rubber, and it's to the touch at least it feels okay. But in order to touch it for every movement, I mean, if it's really bad, you can always just grab the sway bar and give it a really good tug. And I can't move it at all, but we can also basically just use the same procedure with the bushings. Just get our pry bar, you know, rest it against part of the frame or another control arm, push it up and down, see if we can get it to move, click, anything. And no, I can't, there's no movement at all. It's pretty firm. It's pretty firm in there, so pretty sure it's not the sway bar bushing either. Okay, so next it's time to test this rear one, and I don't know how much of this you can see, but there's quite a bit of movement here, and I'm not even really pressing down on this pry bar that much. In fact, this rubber piece inside is pretty loose. Now this is not loose enough where this is making contact with the, or maybe it is in the back, I don't know, I can't tell. Making contact with the bracket, but I can see how this would develop you know, our vibration issue. Okay, before we blame everything on this bushing, let's check a couple other components too. There's just this, you know, there's this bushing here that's at the bottom of the strut tower there, and that could be worn. I mean, I see a little tear under. I see a little tear underneath it, so we're gonna get our pry bar and try to see how much movement there is in that. Okay, again, there's some movement, but not enough to make any noises. There's no way this thing is hitting the bracket or anything. That's just normal amount of movement, so pretty sure this is not our problem. Okay, next we're gonna test this piece that connects our sway bar to this front control arm. There's two ball joints in here that are connecting these two pieces together. You want to test these for any movement. Just stick a pry bar in between the control arm and the ball joints and press up on them. And what you want to look for is for like a popping movement or sound, and if they do, that means that ball joint is bad. But I'm sure you can buy this unit as a set and just throw it in there if you have a bad one. And on ours, we don't have any kind of popping sound or movement, so that piece is good as well. Okay, there's still one more test I want to do before I replace that control arm, and that is to raise both these control arms and then test these ball joints. Do that by, you can either stick the wheel back on here or just use a pry bar. I like to use the pry bar, but you need to kind of force it, because sometimes if you got a bad ball joint, you really have to put some pressure on it for it to pop and for you to realize it's a bad ball joint. This one is pretty solid. There's no way that's a bad ball joint. Okay, gotta do the same for these upper ones. Nothing there. Nothing, no movement on this one either. Okay, so it looks like we're gonna have to replace this control arm. Very good. This is pretty simple. It's just pretty much attached to the to the rest of the suspension by just this ball joint here, and then back there by one bolt that goes through the frame. There's a bracket that attaches to the frame. So we're just gonna take this nut off first. I'm using my metric wrench since I don't have the right size. I'm sorry, I'm using my standard size wrench, which is 3/4 of an inch, and since there's not enough room here, I can't get a socket and a ratchet on there. So, but you want to be very careful not to strip this bolt. This is not the right size for this, obviously, but and I'm not sure what the right equivalent of the metric is, but you wanna, hopefully if you have one, and use a metric wrench to twist this off. So just gonna, it wasn't on there that hard, but yours could be, so careful, you don't want to strip that bolt. Alright, and here's the nut that's holding this ball joint in. There we go. Okay, next what I'd like to do is just spray some PP blaster around this ball joint where it goes through the hub, and let it sit for a good, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes. You can obviously start hammering on this, and the way you want to take this out is you start hammering on this part where that bolt goes through, and you hammer on that until this knocks it loose. But PP blaster definitely helps. Also, once you start hammering and it doesn't come off, then again spray some PP blaster, wait 5-10 minutes, then start hammering again. That usually gets it off. There we go. Okay, so in order to get this other end of the control arm out, you need to, there's a nut on this side that you need to hold in place. I'm using the 3/4 inch wrench, and then there's a bolt in there that you can have access to with your ratchet through the hole in the frame, and that's just going to require an 18mm socket. There's the nut. Also, since our control arm is loose on this side, it's always going to help to smooth it around, and then you'll be able to get this out. There's our bolt. Okay, so it's time to install our new control arm. Obviously make sure they match both in size and you know, the bushings, the ball joints, the threads and everything, all the same. And then you just put this in on this side first, get your bolt in, and we're gonna wiggle this around. And basically just, yeah, wiggle it around until that bolt goes all the way through and comes out the other side, and then we put the nut on the other side. Okay, so something to watch out for when you go to put this this side of the control arm in is that there's actually two holes here. You want to make sure you put in the one that the previous one was in, and mine was in the hole that's in the front one, that's in the front towards the outside of the car. So yeah, make sure you put it in the right hole. There's that. For now, we're just gonna hand tighten these for now, but so after we put the other side of the control arm in, we're gonna come back and start tightening them down on both sides. Okay, next it's time to put this other side in and just push it until it lines up, and just press it up. Next we put this nut in and tighten it down. I don't have a torque spec for this, but you should probably look it up. I'm gonna just go by experience, but you wanna definitely look this up and torque it down to spec. Okay, there's that. Okay, next we tighten this other end down, just the same way we loosened it. Okay, next we just put on our wheel and go for a test drive, and hopefully our vibration issue has gone away. Okay, so it's the next day and we are on our test drive, and there's the bump, and we still can hear the bump, the pop, or the noise, or I don't even know how to explain this. It's more like a vibration slash popping noise, but anyway, it's still there. So obviously was not that control arm, And to be honest, you know, when I was replacing it, that control arm was bad. The bushing was bad, but it wasn't the worst that I've seen. And usually you usually hear a clunking noise when you know, your control arms are real bad, and that's the noise when the metal on the control arm is hitting that metal bracket, so you hear the clunk clunk clunk. But this is more like a popping slash vibrating noise, and I can't even feel it, I just hear it. And it's not really that pronounced. It's really, I mean, you really have to look for, you know, listen for it. You know, I noticed it because I drive this car all the time, but I think if someone was driving this, they wouldn't notice it until for quite some time probably. Okay, so as far as what we're gonna do next as well, you know, I didn't get this on camera, but I did inspect the strut on that side while I was you know, testing all the bushings and stuff. But you know, there was no leaking from the strut. I also did the pushing down on the corners to see if the struts are still you know, pretty firm, and they are. The strut itself is not a problem, but I'm thinking maybe there's a chance that there's a problem with the strut mount on that side, or also I'm going to take off the splash shield that's underneath the car and take a closer look at the sway bar bushings that are underneath there. You know, there might be movement that might be only seen when you take off that splash shield and take a closer look. Besides that, you know, I'm pretty sure it's one of those things, or it could just be something totally unrelated to the suspension too. So, you know, taking off that splash shield might you know, might shed some light on that. But yeah, you know, anyway, this video is gonna be just on replacing the control arm. You know, it's I needed to replace that control arm anyway. It did end up solving the problem. So, you know, I had that control arm laying around from a previous from a previous job, so it didn't cost me anything. But anyway, we're gonna just wrap this video up and just make this control arm replacement on an Audi, and then in the next video I'm gonna go through you know, taking a look at those bushings, and also checking out the strut mount, probably having to take apart the strut and taking the strut mount out and looking at it. Okay, so yeah, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and you want to see more, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.